Have you ever really stopped to think about it? What makes someone a U.S. citizen just because they were born here? It seems, well, automatic, right? Here in America. But this really fundamental idea, it's actually rooted in a very specific, pretty dramatic moment in our history and law. It's not just a given. So today on the Deep Dive, we're going to unpack the fascinating story of birthright citizenship. We'll specifically look at its origins and its meaning within the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It's really one of those foundational American concepts that shapes so much, but, the actual legal stuff, the history behind it, it's often, well, misunderstood. We're aiming to make it easy to digest.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do here. Our goal is to get past just the surface level. We're going to explore the precise legal ideas, really dig into the critical historical context that made this amendment so vital, and maybe reveal some surprising details about how this right came about and, crucially, how it's still understood today. We want you to have those aha moments, where it clicks.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into this. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning, because even simple-sounding legal ideas can have a lot going on beneath the surface. What exactly is birthright citizenship? And how is it, officially written down in U.S. law?
Okay, so at its core, birthright citizenship is basically the legal idea that anyone born inside a country's borders automatically gets citizenship of that country. In legal speak, they call it jus soli. That's Latin for right of the soil. It's pretty different from the other main idea, jus sanguinis, or right of blood, where your citizenship comes from your parents, no matter where you were born. The U.S., well, it firmly picked the jus soli path, with just a couple of tiny exceptions.
And it's not just like a tradition here, right? It's actually in the Constitution.
Absolutely. Yep. In the United States, this right is cemented right there in the 14th Amendment, specifically what's called the Citizenship Clause. And the exact words, they're really important. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That single sentence, ratified after the Civil War, it fundamentally changed who belonged in America. It was a very deliberate move away from basing citizenship on ethnicity or family line, which was common elsewhere. It was, frankly, a radical statement about inclusive citizenship for its time.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Why was this amendment even necessary? You might think, well, hasn't it always been this way? But American history, especially around the mid-1800s, tells a very different story. A painful one, often. What was going on that made such a clear statement on citizenship so urgent?
That's such a key question because the 14th Amendment didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was ratified in 1868, right smack in the middle of Reconstruction after the devastation of the Civil War. You have to picture the country then. Millions of formerly enslaved people were legally free, sure, but they had no clear protected status. It wasn't just abstract law. It was a huge human rights issue needing a solid legal answer.
And it took on a major injustice head-on, didn't it? That awful 1857 Supreme Court decision, Dred Scott v. Sanford. It had basically said people of African descent, free or enslaved, just couldn't be citizens. How did the 14th Amendment tackle that ruling?
It was a direct hit, a total rejection of Dred Scott. The Citizenship Clause was written specifically to cancel out that decision, to make it absolutely clear that former slaves and really everyone born in the U.S. were citizens, period. And beyond Dred Scott, it was also aimed at something called the Black Codes.
Ah, the Black Codes.
Yeah, these were terrible laws that Southern states rushed to pass right after emancipation. They were designed to severely limit the rights of Black Americans, things like owning property, moving freely, even having basic legal rights. It was basically an attempt to bring back racial control, just, under a different name. So, connecting this back for you, the listener, before this amendment, citizenship rules were a mess, inconsistent, discriminatory, leaving huge groups of people unprotected. The 14th Amendment was meant to create one clear, inclusive, national standard. It's a powerful statement. No state could deny citizenship or equal protection to anyone born here. It laid a uniform foundation across the whole country for the very first time.
Making sure your birthplace, not your background, was the key.
Exactly. It was about ensuring your skin color or your parents' history couldn't bar you from citizenship if you were born on U.S. soil.
Okay, let's zoom in on that phrase we heard, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Sounds a bit like legal jargon, right? But its interpretation seems to be the absolute key to how broad birthright citizenship actually is. How have the courts figured out what that phrase really means? Any big cases?
Oh, absolutely. That phrase is central. And the number one Supreme Court case for interpreting the Citizenship Clause is United States v. Wong Kim Ark. That was decided back in 1898. And this wasn't just, a technical legal win. It was a major statement that the Constitution's promise of birthright citizenship applied regardless of race, even when there was a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment.
Could you give us the rundown on that case? What happened?
Sure. So Wong Kim Ark was born in the U.S. in San Francisco back in 1873. His parents were Chinese immigrants. Now, at that time, because of laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese immigrants themselves were actually forbidden from becoming U.S. citizens through naturalization. But the Supreme Court looked at the 14th Amendment and ruled very clearly. Because Wong Kim Ark was born on U.S. soil, he was a U.S. citizen. Simple as that. The law barring his parents didn't matter for his citizenship.
Wow. Okay, so that ruling must have sent ripples.
Yeah.
Right? It basically cemented the idea that citizenship wasn't about the parent status. So this decision set a really strong precedent. Pretty much everyone born on U.S. soil is automatically a citizen. It didn't matter about the parent's nationality or immigration status. That was a huge clarification.
A massive clarification. It showed the amendment was meant to be read broadly, even when it pushed against the prejudices of the day.
Okay, so with that Wong Kim Ark case setting the stage, let's get practical. You said nearly everyone. What does that actually cover? Let's break down the specifics, because I think people have assumptions here that might be wrong, like it's just the 50 states, right? Or is it more?
It's definitely more than just the 50 states. That's the starting point, of course.
Yeah.
But it also extends to U.S. territories, think Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands. And it even covers births in U.S. territorial waters. And get this, even the airspace above these areas.
Well, airspace. Seriously.
Seriously. So, yeah, technically, if a baby was born on a plane flying directly over, say, Ohio, even if the parents were just visiting from another country, that baby is a U.S. citizen.
That is quite literal. Okay, what else?
Well, it also includes birth on a foreign ship, if that ship is in U.S. internal waters. Or, like we said, if a birth happens in U.S. airspace. And here's the really big one, the one that comes up in debates today. Your parent's citizenship or immigration status doesn't affect it. Children born to undocumented immigrants in the U.S. are U.S. citizens. The 14th Amendment's language is just really broad on that point.
Okay, so it's incredibly broad, but you did say nearly everyone, so there must be some exceptions.
There are, but they're very few and very specific. And understanding why there are exceptions actually helps clarify what subject to the jurisdiction really means in practice.
Right, what are these narrow exceptions then?
Okay, the first one, probably the best known, involves children born to foreign diplomats while they're serving in the U.S. They're excluded because diplomats have diplomatic immunity. They aren't fully subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. in the same way everyone else is. Their legal allegiance is still to their home country. The child kind of inherits that status temporarily.
Makes sense. Diplomatic immunity is a unique situation.
Right.
What else?
Another exception, which thankfully isn't really relevant today, covers children born to enemy soldiers who might be occupying U.S. territory during a war. Again, the logic is similar. Their parents are acting as agents of a hostile foreign power, so they aren't under U.S. jurisdiction in the normal sense.
Okay, that seems pretty clear-cut, if rare. Any others?
Yes. There's one more important one that sometimes causes confusion. Based on the source material, children born on U.S. military bases abroad are generally not considered born on U.S. soil for 14th Amendment purposes.
Oh, interesting. So even though it's a U.S. base.
Right. So if a service member's child is born on a base in, say, Germany or Japan, they don't automatically get citizenship just from being born there under the 14th Amendment. Now, they almost always do become citizens, but it's usually through laws related to their parents being U.S. citizens, not directly from the location of birth itself under the jus soli principle of the 14th Amendment. The base isn't considered sovereign U.S. soil in that specific legal context.
Huh. It's a subtle but important distinction.
It really is. And what's striking is just how narrow these exceptions are. They really highlight how incredibly broad the main principle is. The default is citizenship if born here. That was the whole point after the Civil War, create a clear, inclusive standard.
So let's bring this up to the present day. Even with, this clear legal foundation, over a century of court decisions affirming it, birthright citizenship is still debated a lot. Especially when it comes to kids of undocumented immigrants. It feels like it's always in the news cycle somehow. How do we square the legal reality with the ongoing political talk?
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic politically, and this really brings up a critical point for you, the listener, to think about. How do we separate established law, what the Constitution says, what the courts have ruled consistently from political debate, which might want to change or reinterpret things? The legal consensus among scholars, courts for over 100 years has been solid. The 14th Amendment means what Wong Kim Ark said it means: citizenship for nearly everyone born here, except for those few narrow cases we just discussed.
So where does the debate come from then?
Well, often the arguments against it try to reinterpret that key phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Some argue it should only apply if the parents owe full political allegiance to the U.S. But, again, that specific interpretation has been consistently shot down by the Supreme Court ever since Wong Kim Ark. So the debate often gets into different ways of reading the Constitution itself. Is it fixed or does it evolve? But that's a separate conversation from what the law currently is.
Right. And it's important to see how this connects to today. The 14th Amendment isn't just some dusty old document. It's really fundamental to American law. It came out of that post-Civil War push for equality, for a clear definition of who belongs. And because of that deep history, it continues to frame how we talk about immigration, about civil rights, about, who gets to be an American. It's part of our national identity conversation.
Absolutely. It reflects our history and definitely shapes our present challenges.
So just to recap as we finish this deep dive, we've seen the 14th Amendment isn't just history. It's the absolute foundation of birthright citizenship, that just solid principle. It was put in place with a really clear game-changing goal: guarantee equality and define citizenship for everyone after the Civil War. And landmark cases like Wong Kim Ark locks that interpretation in place, making it broad and inclusive with only those very specific, very narrow exceptions.
Understanding this is just so crucial. It helps you make sense of American history, yes, but also the ongoing debates we have right now about citizenship, immigration, civil rights. It's really a lens for viewing a lot of major policy discussions in the U.S. It shapes who we are.
So as we wrap up, here's something to think about. What does it really mean for a country to define its people mainly by where they're born? To embrace this right of the soil so broadly? And how does this principle, which has lasted so long, reflect or maybe even challenge how we think about belonging and inclusion today in a really diverse modern society? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope we've made this complex piece of American law and history a bit easier to digest.